public comment immediately, but I thought I would just give Marie the chance to address the substitute shortage piece, which was here before COVID.
Yes, sure. Thank you for that. And thank you for the letter that came in. As Dr. Rivera pointed out, we've had a substitute shortage really in Guilderland, in the region, in the state, in the nation for a number of years. And the pandemic has exacerbated it just tremendously. So we do participate in the substitute teacher service hosted through Capital Region BoCEs. But we have struggled this year mightily to be able to get folks who are signed up through that service to be available to come. And that's not just in Guilderland. The fill rate for the vacancies that we have, we just can't get a substitute for them. And I think it's part shortage, although I also think that, you know, Mrs. North's comment about people being a little wary about coming into schools to substitute probably plays into it as well. But I do think it's worthwhile to talk about how we end up with a staffing shortage when we have to quarantine, or if we have people who need to teach remotely. And I'll have Regan jump in if I miss anything here. But when we identify a positive case, the protocols that we use through Albany County require us to do contact tracing. And particularly in the high school, which is the building where we've struggled the most, a single case could have an impact on multiple teachers because students travel through the day to various courses. And the protocols for quarantining are pretty strict. So if you are in the same classroom as a person who tested positive, you're going to be quarantined for 10 days. And sometimes a single case will affect 7 or 8 teachers. Now, we can have those teachers quarantine and provide their instruction remotely from home, but we still need to have supervision in those classrooms for the children who are there in person. So we pull folks from all kinds of roles in order to do that. So sometimes it's a substitute. Sometimes we have our building level substitutes, which is a new thing that we have in the last couple of years to cover those classes. We ask our aide monitors to cover. We ask TAs. Sometimes our administrators cover. But when we hit a certain number of absences, like 20, usually at the high school, we literally run out of people to cover all of those classes. We also have to cover all the lunches as well. So it quickly becomes impossible to keep open and supervise everyone just because of the number of people who are impacted by an individual case. And then you multiply that by, for example, Farnsworth, if they also have many absences, Mr. Laster is doing the same kind of thing of pulling people from all over different roles in order to cover. And we just quickly run out of people to do that supervision. What did I forget, Regan?
So you did great. The only thing that I would add is that what has recently even made the problem larger is Albany County's guidance on exclusion household members for being symptomatic. So if you've got somebody in your household who is being tested or has symptoms, everybody in the house has to quarantine until you get that negative test back. And so for staff with children who have symptoms, whereas before they were able to still come as long as they didn't have symptoms, that's a change now that has even made the problem that much more great.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wiles. Next on the agenda, we have a budget development report, and I think this is Danielle and Neil. We'll turn it over to you.
Danielle, I'm going first because I have to share the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so just give me a minute to pull it up.
Okay. You all set? Okay. I'm here to talk about our bus proposition for our annual bus proposition for the 21-22 school year. Obviously, it's annual, so this is something I do every year. The next slide speaks to our current fleet. Currently, we have 71 66 passenger, which are the large buses, 15 30 passenger buses, 8 18 and 1 wheelchair buses. There are small buses with wheelchair lifts, 3 minivans, 3 large buses that are equipped with a wheelchair lift that we can have many different configurations, and 2 Suburbans for a total of 102. I thought as a reference point this year, I'm going back to 1920 for our routing scheme because this is more of our norm compared to what we're doing this year. I just wanted to give everybody a reference point. In 1920, we had 4,856 students enrolled, 62 in-house bus routes, and 14 outsourced bus routes, meaning we had contractors bringing those students to and from their private and parochial schools and perhaps special ed placements. We had 56 what we did in Gilliland, we had 56 in-district routes, 6 out-of-district combination routes, meaning perhaps it might have been some special ed kids, also in combination with perhaps a private school. We serviced 18 daycares at that time, 13 work programs, numerous athletic and practice trips daily, and an average at that time of 9 Farnsworth Middle School clinics. This year, we have 4,824 students enrolled, 3,554 in-person learners, 1,381 remote learners, and 2,100 students, give or take 2,100 students, opted out of transportation. So that leaves us with only 50 in-house bus routes. 34 of them are in-district routes. We have 4 BoE routes, 12 out-of-district combination routes, and currently, well, depending on the day, we're servicing about 13 daycares. 21 outsourced bus routes, again, meaning that the vendors are bringing those students to and from their private schools. So it's a big difference, but that hopefully next year we'll go back to our normal, and we will, need more buses. We currently have a lot of buses sitting idle because we're just not using them, but we would never reduce the fleet based on this current year. Our fleet concerns, as always, are primarily corrosion because of the corrosive materials that they put on the roads on days like this. And for those of you that don't know, school buses are inspected twice a year, every 6 months. The DOT inspectors come to our facility, and with a school bus, unlike a normal my car, your car, everything on the bus has to operate as it's intended to. And if it does not, the bus will fail inspection. There's levels of failures, but it will fail inspection. It will be pulled off the road. So we have to maintain these buses to, top notch. And with the corrosion, that's a big deal because you can't have holes with, rust that penetrate the whole side of the bus. You can't have that. And you cannot use Bondo. You would have to replace the whole side, the whole sheet, the whole metal sheet of the bus. And it's very costly to do that. On top of that, the exhaust systems on some of our buses, just to change, could run us upwards of $5,000. Fuel tanks rot away. Those cost on average $900. And none of these figures include labor costs. This is just to replace a fuel tank. To buy a fuel tank is $900. Radiators corrode away, and the body corrosion, as I said, is a huge factor. And the average value of the buses that are at or above 10 years old is around $2,900. So I don't think it's wise to put $5,000 worth of bodywork into a bus that's worth $2,900. That's the reason we need new buses. We strive for a 10-year replacement plan. We were behind the 8 ball with that. However, I'm proud to say, I'm happy to say that we finally have achieved our 10-year replacement plan after many years of being very consistent with our purchasing. You know, and in terms of the corrosion, Guilderland, we couldn't do much more in Guilderland. With the purchase of all of our new buses, we purchased what's called Carwell Rust Protection, which is applied every year for 10 years. So we purchased it, we purchased it once with the initial purchase of the bus, and every summer this company comes and undercoats our buses for 10 full years. We have a drive-through bus wash with undercarriage rinse. Prior to DOT inspection, the buses are steam cleaned underneath, so they're thoroughly washed a lot. And well, we didn't do it this past summer because of COVID, but generally every year in the summer, we have a bus wash crew that washes and thoroughly disinfects and hand waxes our school buses. So there's really not much more that we could do to prevent corrosion. We do it all, we try real hard, but unfortunately it still happens. And if Marie would forward to the next slide, I have pictures of current buses in our fleet, and you can see the rust and corrosion, particularly on bus 306 underneath the windows. It's pretty dramatic, and that bus will remain in our fleet for a couple more cycles. So, you know, these are the things we're dealing with, and we have to take care of that. So it's costly. So it's best to replace them once they hit the age of 10 years old. Also, we have some advantages with our new school buses. We have transitioned in the last 3 cycles over to gasolines, large school buses. And with that, we achieved some cost savings because with gas buses, there are no fuel filters, no diesel particulate fluid that has to be constantly added to the buses, 14 fewer quarts of oil per change, no expensive exhaust system, it's just a standard exhaust system, and no exhaust system maintenance. And with the new buses, we get, you know, the latest technology as with any vehicle. We have traction control, ProFlex step-well coatings, and we purchase, this is an aftermarket edition, we purchased the SEON 6-camera system, which is phenomenal. And on the next slide, you can see what those 6 cameras show in the interior of the bus. The first camera is in the bulkhead looking back. The second camera looks down at the stepwell. The third camera is in the middle, installed in the middle of the bus, and it kind of faces backwards. The fourth camera is at the back of the bus facing forward. The fifth camera is in the bulkhead facing outwards, so you can see what's happening in front when children are crossing. And the sixth camera is stationed outside the bus below the stop sign, looking backwards in the event that somebody runs through the reds. There's a button on the dash the driver can push, and we can capture, generally, it doesn't always work perfect, but generally we can capture a picture of the person that may have ran through the reds and hopefully get a license plate, because there's a new law in New York. It's the stop arm camera law, which it's a little complicated because all municipalities have to have intermunicipal agreements to actually proceed with tickets being issued. And that's quite an undertaking in a district such as Guilderland, because we cover a lot of different municipalities, and we would have to have signed agreements with all those municipalities. But it's here and it's coming, and it's in the future that we will be able to pursue people that run through our red lights, which of course is very dangerous. So that is an actual picture that came from one of our school buses of a car that ran through the reds. And when we look at it through the computer, we can kind of zero in on the license plate. So that's very helpful. On the next slide is a graph of our 12-year purchase history. And as you can see, we've been very consistent. And as I said, I think we should be proud. We finally made it to the 10-year replacement plan. We have a nice fleet. Everything's in good working order. and we should continue down that road. I mean, I'm proud of that. So with all that being said, our wish list for the next school year is 8 large buses, 6 of them just standard issue school buses, and 2 of them we want to purchase with what's called on-spot chains, which are chains that drop down under the rear wheels in the event of weather like today, and it provides us with extra traction. And how we work that is, if we have 2 buses that we plan on out, surplusing, we would replace those 2 with chains. So that's how we came up with the number of 2. No small buses this year because of COVID. We are only running 2 of our small school buses this year. So there's no sense in purchasing, new ones, because most of ours are just sitting idle right now, and there's no wear and tear, no mileage is being added to them. So we will forego any small buses this year. So does anybody, well, in terms of school buses, does anybody have any questions?
I have a question, Danielle.
Sure.
I've only been on for a year or so, but has there ever been talk of like transitioning toward electric buses? I know there's a lot that goes into that. I'm just wondering if there's been a analysis or anything like that through the years.
Analysis, no. We've talked about it, certainly. It's definitely in the future. In fact, I believe that Governor Cuomo has it off in the distance where we're going to have to purchase electric school buses. However, at this point, they're not really readily available. And so we're spending, 100, let's just round numbers, $100,000 on a standard issue gasoline school bus. I talked to one of our vendors, and the price for an electric school bus currently is $300,000. So
Wow.
I definitely think it's in our future. I just don't think we're ready for that right now.
Well, yeah, I think it's definitely in the future, and there's lots of structural things that need to happen as far as electricity and plugging,
Right.
all that stuff too. That's a huge pull.
Absolutely. I mean, that would be a whole other issue. The price of the bus, and then the infrastructure that would go along with that. But I do see it coming. I think it's coming.
It's a large commitment, but I'm sure we'll see it in the near future here.
Certainly.
Danielle, I have a question. Excuse me. The rust can't be anywhere on the bus at all, not just around the body, the body where the students are, or inside the bus, like under the windows even, is not acceptable?
No, it's not acceptable. It is not acceptable.
Then how is that one bus still on the road?
I'm sorry, what?
How is that one bus still on the road? The
Well,
one
we will have to fix that. I mean, simple surface rust is acceptable, but surface rust always turns into more. So there will come a time when all that rust will have to be tended to. If the bus remains, if it, it stays under 10 years and it remains in our fleet. I think Neil's up.
All right, thank you.
You're very welcome.
I just wanted to touch on another proposal for a vehicle purchase, and this is to replace our delivery and courier vehicle. And this is something that we do, every 7, 8, 9 years. So you don't see these too often, but occasionally we do need to replace some of our older equipment with newer equipment. So this year, and this is for our maintenance department, we're looking to retire a 2003 box truck with 180,000 miles that's currently in use. So it's over 17 years old. We use it daily, but it is showing its age, obviously needing more repair, getting close to the end of the life. So we need to start looking at replacing that and replacing it soon. We also have a second vehicle, and given the large geographic nature of our district and having 7 schools and a lot of activities between those schools, we have a cube van that's a 2012 that has 112,000 miles. And what we plan to do right now, it's our secondary vehicle, or we would make that our primary delivery vehicle, and we would purchase a new vehicle. And the estimated cost to do that is $45,000 to $55,000. What we're still looking at, and this is Cliff Nooney, our facilities director, is looking at is the best possible configuration given our needs in the district, both now and into the future, because as you can see, we're going to have this vehicle for quite some time. He's been working with a state contract vendor in Western New York. We have some options, obviously, and can configure a vehicle in different ways, and they'll build it for us in the manner that we wish. So he's currently working with the vendor to try to make sure that whatever we put together will fit within this price range, as well as meet our current and future needs. So we'd like to add this as well to the bus proposition and making it a bus and vehicle proposition. And be happy to take any questions that you might have. If there's no questions, what I will say is this is presented for information this evening. What we will be doing is bringing this before the board to authorize. And if it is authorized by the board, it would go before the voters with the May budget vote.
Neil, can you explain again for people who are listening that why we can get a truck that can do all of that for $45,000 to $55,000?
That's the beauty of the state contracts that we have access to as a school district. So this is the state of New York that actually bids out vehicles, all types of services across the state. And as a school district or any local governmental agencies, towns are available, the state of New York's available to access these contracts, as well as towns, villages, counties, and school districts. So by leveraging all of those municipalities within the state of New York, the state of New York is able to negotiate some very attractive pricing and agreements with vendors because of a volume that a vendor can have. So in this case, and vehicles are one of the ones that they do really well with, they're bringing a lot of vehicle business to a particular dealer or dealers throughout the state of New York. So we're all accessing the same vendors that have been selected by the state. So the state does all of the work. They control all the bidding requirements. They qualify the vendor. They make sure that they are able to meet the requirements of the contract. That also means the dealer also can work with the manufacturers, vehicle manufacturers, because they know that they're going to bring a lot of business to a particular vendor, automobile manufacturer, for example. So they're able to get better pricing from the automobile manufacturer. That pricing is passed down to the dealership, and then it ultimately comes back to the school district. So if you look in the paper and see what some of the vehicle prices are, we're talking about getting some sort of delivery van, probably with a lift gate, those sorts of things in the $45,000 to $55,000 range, which you and I could not come anywhere close to if we were to go to a dealership and try to buy one of those. So it is a great benefit to us, and we do it with school buses too. The beauty of this is New York State does not need any school buses, but they put together a contract for school districts throughout the state of New York, and the same thing. All of the school districts are utilizing the state contracts to purchase buses. So we get very attractive pricing on school buses as well. So this is just an extension of that falls down into trucks and cars and other types of vehicles used by state agencies as well as local entities.
Thank you.
There are no other questions. Neil, do you want to, looks like you have the second part of this budget presentation.
Yes, we can switch over to the budget presentation. Dr. Wiles is going to show that one as well. So give her a moment to bring that one up.
Thank you.
I'm going to say goodnight because 4 a.m. rolls around quite quickly.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. That was good.
Good
You're
luck.
welcome. Talk to you in the morning, Marie.
Yes, indeed. I'm having a little trouble here. Just give me a second. I'm not sure. Here we go.
Okay, thank you, Marie.
You're very
So-
welcome.
We have two topics. We're going to talk about state aid and our tax levy limit calculation. And again, this is part of our ongoing presentations talking about the development of the 2021-22 budget. So the governor has released an executive budget proposal for 2021-22. It's typically done around this time, so it was pretty much on schedule. And what I will tell you is I'm going to try to explain as best as I can my understanding of his proposal. What I will also say, it's very complex, and there's a lot of organizations that we as school districts work with that are trying to decipher the same document. So this is what I'll say is a conglomeration of the best information we have available from a variety of sources about the executive budget proposal and what it means. So keep that in mind. I don't have all the answers. I don't have any of all the behind the scenes insight into the development. What we're dealing with is what's been shared with the public through the governor's office and through the budget briefing book. So with that being said, I think one of the terms that was described in some of the information that I received is it's a work in progress. And I think we have to keep that in mind. There's a lot at play this year, and we talked before about a lot of uncertainty around the budget and revenue within New York State. So this budget is an attempt to try to put some parameters around what that might look like without having all of the information available either. So it's a work in progress, and I think we have to keep that in mind. So basically what Governor Cuomo announced was two options that he was considering for school aid. The first was based on receiving an additional $15 billion in federal aid. This is something he's talked about on his briefings. He's pled for the federal government to provide $15 billion in aid to New York State. So he's asked and made that request repeatedly and loudly. But what we're seeing in this particular proposal is it's not being based on receiving $15 billion in federal aid, and that would be part of the upcoming stimulus package that's under discussion. But he utilized for this budget a lesser amount of $6 billion in federal aid. So that's what we're going to be looking at in terms of his executive budget proposal, was that he's using $6 billion at this point, and it could change, but that's the best number he's come up with at this point in time regarding an executive budget proposal. So as I said, we're assuming at least $6 billion in new state aid funding. That has yet to be approved, and that's what we have to keep in mind, and that's why we're somewhere between $6 billion and $15 billion. Nothing has yet been approved from the federal government, so we'll have to see where that goes. But his executive proposal, as stated, it's an overall increase in school aid of $2.1 billion. It does allocate $3.8 billion in federal coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriations act, also known as the CRRSA. So those stimulus funds were enacted in December 27th, 2020, and they're incorporated into his budget for 21-22. Also, as part of this, there's some new pieces that we haven't seen before in the budgeting process. There's a new local district funding adjustment, which is a reduction in state aid to schools by $1.35 billion, so taking money away, and also reducing expense-based aids. He created a newly consolidated services aid block grant, and that's being reduced by nearly $400 million. And that encompasses a number of expenditure-driven aids that have all been identified separately in the past. And you have growth in those areas or reduction in areas based on your expenditures from year to year. So this would consolidate all of those into one block grant. And there's some issues or concerns around that, in that you lose the identity and you lose the trail. So if you have increased expenditures, you may not receive aid for those. By the same token, if you have reduced expenditures, which doesn't happen a lot, you won't see your aid go down, but more worry about increasing expenditures and not having the aid follow along in a corresponding fashion. So both of those reductions, the 1.5 billion and the 400 million, so that gets us to about 1.75 million, they will be offset by federal funding, the CRRSA Act. So here's what the state aid runs, and we get state aid runs every year whenever the executive budget is released, so we can look at it on a district by district basis. And what they typically show is what's the current year and then what's projected for next year. And what we're looking at in the current year is what we budgeted, what we had anticipated for this year. So that's in the first column, our budget for state aid in the current year, what we expect to receive in the current year in terms of aid, and then what does the executive budget proposal look like for the following school year. So it kind of gives us that map of what, current year budget, what are we looking at in terms of reality, in terms of what we might receive this year, and then what does that mean when we look at it from budget to budget and the impact on next year. So just looking down the slide, foundation aid under this proposal, and that's the aid, I'll just remind you, that follows every student in New York State to provide a sound basic education. That has been frozen. This will be the second year it's been frozen on this proposal. So you'll see it's just flat all the way across, that 15.1 million for our school districts. So that hasn't changed under this proposal. And then we have a series of expenditure-driven aids, BoCE's aid, software, library, textbook, hardware and technology, and transportation. Again, they all have their own identity in the current year. Under this proposal, they would be put together in that block services grant, and that would continue into next year as well. So in the middle column, our estimated state aid, I've combined that to reflect what the plan is for the following year. And you can see there's an increase of about $200,000, a little more than that in the services aid category when we're looking from what we expect to get this year to the following year. And then we have excess cost aid, and this is for students with disabilities. So again, we're looking at what we had in the current year and then a proposed increase going into next year. Again, that's based on expenses that we pay related to the transportation and education of those students. A building aid as well. Right on target with that in terms of our budget and what we expect to receive. And we expect to see a little bump under the executive budget proposal for that. Then what we get to in the current year is the pandemic adjustment. So this was federal money that was approved through the CARES Act earlier last year in the fall and winter time. We received aid of $196,000, but the state came in and said, we're going to give you the aid, but we're going to turn around and take out an equal amount. So we really didn't see any increase from that. The state got the money, they gave the money to us, and then they turned around and took it out of our aid allocation for the year. So net for the school district was no gain. So in terms of looking at our total aid, we're looking year to year, and we have seen some reduction in aid from what we expected this year. We're down about $271,000, our current projection for this year. Looking from our current budget to 2021-22, we're looking at an increase of about $125,000. So from a budget perspective, that's what we're looking at. What do we have in the budget in the current year, and what can we expect in next year's budget? $125,000 in terms of a percentage. That's 1/2 of 1%. And it appears across the state that most school districts are right in about a flat sort of increase for 21-22. High need schools may get a little bit more. Overall in the state, it's pretty much flat. For our district, it represents that as well. Our aid is relatively flat from year to year. There are some changes under the budget proposal that relate to the STAR exemption, so I thought it would be important to share that with our community members at this time. For the first time, it appears on an aid run. We've never had the STAR exemption, but if you went and actually looked at the aid runs, it is on every school district's aid run. Some discussion about why that is. It's really not aid to schools, it's relief for taxpayers. So why it would be included with state aid, but the thinking appears to be that in order to receive federal funding, the state has to show how much they're providing to support schools and education. It's called maintenance of effort. So the federal dollars would be tied to how much the state supports education in New York State. So by including that, that may help drive some additional federal dollars to New York State. So that appears to be the reason it's on the state aid run. Also under the exemption program, the changes that are being proposed, right now, property owners can age up. So if you're in STAR, you automatically would age up to enhanced STAR, but that will go away under the proposal. Property owners will also have the option to remain in the STAR exemption program, or they can switch to the credit program. So the STAR exemption gives you that reduction off your tax bill. So when the school district sends you your tax bill, if you have a $30,000 exemption, your tax bill is already taken, that $30,000 is already taken into account in terms of generating your tax bill. You've already got a $30,000 exemption, for example. The STAR credit works the opposite way. It would mean that you would pay your full tax bill, and then the state would credit you back, send you a check at some point after school taxes are paid. So you'd have to pay the entire bill up front and then get reimbursed by the state for the amount of the STAR credit. So that's really that impact piece that people have to be aware of, because in the past, if you've relied on having that exemption and a lower tax bill up front, you won't have that option under this proposal. You'd have to pay the full school tax bill and then wait to get your tax credit back from New York State. This is a very important slide, talking, not looking just at what's proposed for next year, but looking beyond what's proposed for next year, terming it a potential financial cliff. And I think it's just something we all have to be cognizant of in terms of the budget discussion. So again, the CRRSA Act funding in 2021-22 will require New York State to fill a projected $1.7 billion revenue gap just to keep the following year in 2022-23 state aid flat. At the same time, New York State's going to be facing a $39 billion revenue loss over the next 4 years. So the money that we get this year from federal funds is being used to help offset some of the support that the state has provided. But then when that money goes away, the point is, will the state have other resources to be able to give that money back to schools to cover what was paid for by federal funds in the following year? And right now, looking at what's been projected in terms of state revenue loss, the state's going to be in tough shape for several years. So again, this is what we would call a one-shot. We have some revenue coming in. We can make that work for 1 year. The question then becomes what's going to happen in the following year, and how is the state going to sustain their support of education without the federal funding? Also, as again, that federal funding is temporary, but the reductions that have been applied for the services aid and the local district funding adjustment, which again was a reduction, both of those being reductions overall, would continue into the future. So setting some pieces in place that say whatever we put into the budget for 21-22 in terms of state funding and state resources, those reductions will carry forward into future years. And then what that brings us to, and those of you that have been on the board for a while or have followed schools for a while will remember the whole gap elimination adjustment. So this came at the end of the Great Recession that happened in the 2008, around that time. Economy tanked, very difficult time for governmental entities, very difficult time for schools. There was some American Reinvestment Act funds, federal funding that came through that helped get through those first couple of years. Then that money dried up. And then there was this period where schools really struggled, the state struggled, and this gap elimination was put into place because the state didn't have enough revenues to fully support education. And each school district took a big hit every year in terms of a reduction in aid, $1 million, $2 million, large scales of money. That went on for about 4 years before it was fully funded again over time. A lot of layoffs, a lot of program reductions, very difficult budget years for school districts. So this is setting up to look a lot like a repeat of the gap elimination adjustment, where we have an influx of federal aid that helps us out for a little while. That aid goes away, and without a robust New York State economy behind it, where does that leave school districts? And it could leave us in the same spot of, again, having to try to work and provide education, sound education program for our students, continuity of services, but at the same time, without a lot of state support to do that. Just to continue with the New York State budget timeline, to give you a framework for that, our legislative hearings started today, and they have a number of topics, and they're going to go through February 23rd. The New York State Legislature, as it always does, will adopt a budget on or before the April 1st deadline. So that's what's really going to determine the amount of state aid that the school district will receive. So right now, what we're talking about is the governor's proposal. And then what really matters for school district is the budget that the legislature adopts, because that is the funding that school districts will receive based on that legislative budget around April 1st. So a lot has to happen in a little amount of time. But right now, as you can see, no increase in aid really for school districts for next year in terms of the executive budget proposal. Will that be where we land or not? The other thing that is important to recognize is if the $6 billion doesn't come through, this proposal could get scaled back. It could get worse. On the other hand, if more aid were to come, it's possible that New York State could allocate more to education, but it's not required to, obviously. So we'll have to see where that goes as well. But a lot depends on this current federal stimulus package that's currently under discussion by Congress. And then just moving on a little bit, just wanted to remind you about our tax levy limit, because that's another key component to growth in the budget from year to year and our ability to manage that on a year-to-year basis. So it's an 8-step formula. It's determined by New York State. It's not something the school district makes up. It does limit the increase in the vast majority of expenses to 2% or less based on the preceding calendar consumer price index. And the result of that formula determines the amount that property taxes can increase, which really all it does, all of this, what this formula is only designed to do is set a threshold for voter approval. That's the sole purpose of the calculation. So if the tax increase is less than that threshold amount, the budget passes with 50% or more of the voters voting yes. However, the tax increase is greater than that threshold amount. The budget requires 60% or more of the voting public to vote yes in order to have a passed budget. So if it's greater than that, you can have 55% of your voters approve the budget, but it's not deemed to be a passed budget if you're greater than that threshold amount until you exceed the 60% supermajority. And then also to keep in mind is if the budget's ultimately defeated, you cannot have any increase in the tax levy. So you have to abide by the levy that you have in the current year, and it can't increase at all. And that's if it's defeated by one of two ways. If the budget could be put back up again a second time. So if it is put back up again and it's defeated a second time, it automatically at that point is a defeated budget and you can't have any increase in your tax levy. So just walking through the calculation, and this is how the formula works and how it lays out. So you start with your prior year tax levy. There is a factor called the tax base growth factor that's applied. It's a unique number for every school district, and it really depends on new construction within your school district. So it's not improvements to properties, it's really the value of new construction. So that this is a positive number for us. So that increases our prior year tax levy amount by $322,000 in the formula. Then what we need to do is add our prior year base pilots, $74,288. That determines our capital, and then subtract out, our capital expenditures net of state aid. So these are things that building construction and things like that, where we have capital expenditures. The value of that would be subtracted from the formula. That gets us to our adjusted prior year tax levy. Then we're able to apply that allowable levy growth factor. And again, the most it can be is 2%. It can be less than that if the consumer price index is less than 2%, which it is in the upcoming year. So we can increase that amount by 1.23%, not the 2%, but less than that. That gets us to our growth adjusted tax levy subtotal, which again, overall, compared to our prior year tax levy is about $908,000 increase. We take and subtract our next year pilot payment, and this is payments in lieu of taxes. That gets us to our tax levy limit amount. And then what we're able to do, much like we recognize the capital expenditures net of state aid from the prior year, what we anticipate those are for the upcoming year, we get to add those back in. That gets us to our maximum allowable tax levy amount. That's the key number that we need to focus on. In this case, $76,175,249. That's an increase of $1.184 million over the previous year, or 1.58%. I will tell you there's a couple of factors in here that we're still looking at. Pilots may change a little bit. And we also have some library debt that we're looking at with the construction project there that we have to incorporate. So this may change a little bit, but it won't change by a lot under this formula. So again, we're limited in terms of the tax levy, which is the amount of taxes that we can raise from property owners. Right now, according to this formula, which is preliminary, would limit that growth to 1.58%. So when we put the pieces together between state aid and our tax levy growth, for the executive budget proposal, we're increasing state aid by about $125,000. Our maximum allowable tax levy growth is 1.185. That gets us to a maximum expenditure growth amount of 1.3 million, or 1.27%. So if revenues land where they are, and our tax levy can grow by the amount that we project, the most we can have expenditures increase is 1.39 to stay within the cap and not have to face that supermajority vote. So if we brought this to the voters, 50% voter approval, we would have a passed budget. We wouldn't be in that supermajority category. And that's the last slide. So if there's any questions, I can try to answer those.
Neil, I just had one question. I know you said it's a work in progress, but so the federal support is next year, but that would be a one-time thing, and that would be to make up for the gap for the 22-23 school year?
Well, the money we're going to get, or what the governor is counting on, it would affect the 21-22. That's that $6 billion that he's counting on that Congress is currently discussing.
Mm-hmm.
What is seen at this point is that would be the stimulus package. That would be the amount of money that would help us through the current pandemic crisis and associated, all the things associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing being talked about beyond that. So in the absence of any other federal stimulus package beyond the one that's being discussed now, all the money we would have would be for next school year. And then the question would be, if there's not anything following that, what would that mean? And it's too speculative to say right now that we would have a stimulus package that would impact next year, and then a year from now have another one coming. Could happen, but it also could not happen. So the best information we have at this time is what we're dealing with, which is we know what is under discussion for next school year in terms of state aid. We don't know what could follow that, but But it's important to also recognize the understanding that if nothing follows that these are some one-shot funds that once they're consumed and used, what's going to backfill those?
That's depressing. Okay, thank you.
Yep. And it really depends on the pace of economic recovery as well in the state of New York and throughout all of the states.
No other questions? Okay, thank you, Neil.
You're welcome.
We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the consent items. This includes the minutes from the January 12th meeting, the CPSE and CSE recommendations, the personnel action, and the financials 1 through 6. Can I have a motion to approve these consent items? Charles? Second, Gloria? Any questions on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 9-0. Thank you. And next we have information items, curriculum and instruction. Will that be Regan or Marie?
Actually, it'll be me. I'm gonna play the role of Damien Singleton tonight.
Okay.
I just have one item, and it's some news about our math league. The 2020-2021 Guilderland High School Math League team is leading the region with a total score of 66. And the Math League includes teams from Albany, Saratoga, Schenectady, Onondaga, Monroe, and Erie counties. GHS juniors Ian Zhang and Michael Wong earned perfect scores in the last contest, and they've been recognized by the New York State Math League for this outstanding accomplishment. Ian is also being recognized statewide as being a high-scoring student cumulative with a score of 17 out of 18 points. He's the club president and a proven strong mathlete. The officers have 27 students involved in the club, which can only meet through Google Meets. Regardless, they have remained committed to learning and succeeding together. Our GHS team is currently tied for 19th in the state for high-scoring schools cumulative. And we just want to thank math teacher Jacqueline Stein, as well as the GHS ENL department, for their dedication and support of the Math League team.
Thank you, Dr. Wiles. Next, school business. Back to Neil.
You're muted, Neil.
Thank you, Dr. Wiles. As I was saying, recently the New York State Office of the State Comptroller released its annual report measuring the amount of fiscal stress schools are operating under based on data from the 2019-20 school year. The Comptroller's Office has created a tool that looks at various financial and environmental factors and uses a weighted scoring system which converts those weighted scores into one of 4 designations. The 4 designations are either significant fiscal stress, moderate fiscal stress, susceptible to fiscal stress, or the 4th one's called no designation. And for the 6th year in a row, I'm pleased to report that Guilderland received no designation, indicating that the financial indicators reviewed were not indicative of potential fiscal stress. And what I would also point out is the things that the comptroller is looking at are some of the things that we debate in board debates, things like the amount of fund balance you have, the financial resources you have in terms of economic downturns. And if you don't have enough cash, are you borrowing money? That's looked at negatively. So some of those factors, do we have adequate funds on hand to help during a financial crisis? Also leads to things like when you do that, you can avoid some of the borrowing costs, and that's considered a positive factor. So those are just things to keep in mind when we talk about fiscal stress and what causes fiscal stress.
Thank you, Neil. Next, superintendent information. Dr. Wiles.
Thanks so much. I've got a few items tonight. The first thing I want to report out on are the 3 thought exchanges that are currently in progress. All 3 will wrap up at 5 p.m. this Friday. But let me just give you a flavor for each. One of the groups who we are conducting an exchange with are our students, our 5th through 12th grade students. we've had 995 participants, 1,362 thoughts, and 60,389 ratings. They get the star for the most stars in the 3. And when we meet on February 9th, I'll present more of the findings, but I just wanted to let you know that the things that are high on the list of our students right now, their own mental health has come up. They are concerned with the amount of time they spend doing what we are right now, and that is on a computer screen and in and they talk a lot about, the level of work and the amount of stress that they're under. So I'll share more of those results, but I found it really telling that our students are telling us, I mean, we can see it, but they recognize in themselves that their own mental health is really being tested this year. So more to come on that. We also asked our faculty and staff, and by the way, the question for all 3 was basically the same. It followed Neil's last presentation about the budget and the amount of uncertainty we had. And we were really just asking these groups for their advice on what we should be thinking about as we plan next year's budget. Faculty and staff, so far we've had 73 participants and 29 thoughts and 489 ratings. And a lot of their concerns are, again, thinking about maintaining staffing, making sure we're able to support struggling students. There's ongoing interest in early retirement incentives. Smaller class sizes came up a lot, and a number of other things. So we will talk some more about that, but we're hoping folks will log into that before we close on Friday. And lastly, our families have also been highly engaged in this. We've had, make sure I have the right summary. We've had 300 community members participate with 146 thoughts and 5,838 ratings. Like the thought exchange we did earlier, some of the major themes are about gratitude. Families are just so thankful that their students can be in school. People love our tiny class sizes of 13 and 14, which of course we have done using a very unique method that I don't think we can sustain forever, but I know that are very popular. There's also a plea to make sure we have enough supports for our students, that we're not taking away programs and those things that help our students honestly recover from this very stressful year that they've had. So next month, the next communications committee meets, we'll look at these and then we'll present them in more detail at our next regular board meeting. So let's see, my other screen just decided to go to sleep. I think next is second semester planning, or is it COVID testing?
If COVID testing is next.
Okay, so far we have tested 490 faculty, staff, and students. And we've had 2 positive cases in the surveillance, which puts us at a 0.4 positivity rate in the district, which is tremendously low. However, each time we have a case, it has a pretty significant effect. 3rd grade over at Pine Bush ended up needing to go remote for several days because of a positive case. And the same thing happened to it's either 2 or 3 sections of kindergarten today at GES because of a positive case. I would be remiss not to recognize a number of people who have helped make this whole thing happen. Mary Zwagerman, our head nurse, who's the nurse over at GES, has really been remarkable in coordinating and planning and thinking through all of this. Mike Bastian, our information and data coordinator, has been remarkable in helping us extract data and upload data. And he's made many videos and spreadsheets to help people know how to do the work. And then Marie Stoyevich, she's our new floating nurse, she has jumped into this with both feet. So we're very thankful for all of that. We're going to continue testing in our elementary buildings and the middle school through Friday. And just today, we were talking about finishing the testing for our high school students who have been remote and therefore unable to be tested. And I don't know where the idea came from, but a lot of worry about starting testing on our high school students on their first couple days back after being remote for almost 2 weeks could immediately give us reason to have to be remote again if we discovered a couple of positive cases. So we are working very quickly on a plan to ask our high school students, that's 8 through 12, who have consented, whose parents have consented and they volunteered, to see if they'd be willing to come to a drive-through testing site this Friday, so that if we have any positives, they haven't been in contact with anyone, they can simply go home and do their quarantine without having an impact on other students or our staff. So I have a little core planning team of COVID-19 testing colleagues, and we met today. We're going to meet again tomorrow to see if we can pull this off for Friday, because we think what it will do is help preserve our capacity to keep our kids in school when they come back on Monday. So we're working feverishly to build the drive-through plan, communicate it out to families tomorrow, create a schedule where our students can sign up, and it's a half day for our students, so we can do a chunk before 10 o'clock in the morning, and we can do another chunk of students from like 1:30 till 4. So that's where we are with testing. Any questions on that? All right, hearing none, I'll forge ahead. I'll just say a couple words about second semester planning. Second semester begins on Monday. We have a number of students who are returning from fully remote instruction. We are able to accommodate all of them in their return, so we're really happy about that. The bigger challenge we have for second semester is really addressing some of the concerns that I brought up when we did our panel discussion around providing time within the schedule and our calendar for students who need to access their teachers and vice versa for extra help. How do we do that? So we pulled together the subcommittee from our reopening committee that focuses on instruction to brainstorm some ideas. And we have one idea that I think we're going to work through, and another that we're debating and tinkering with. But the first idea goes a little bit to the person who sent in the public comment about, why don't we close down the building on Wednesdays? There's lots of reasons why we don't do that. But one of the, on that theme, we're looking at the idea of creating 4 fully asynchronous remote days over the second semester that would be used explicitly for teachers to connect with individual or small groups of students who need extra help. And they're timed near the 5-week or end of the marking period to really provide that opportunity for that, whether it's a formal intervention or honestly the lack of informal times to connect with teachers is really, really very much needed. So we've been sharing that idea. This would only be for 6-12. Our elementary friends are not at all interested in remote days, and they have ways to connect with kids because they're mostly in person. So that's one idea. I'll tell you the dates that we're looking at, and we'll put this in writing for our community soon, but we're looking at March 3rd, April 1st, April 29th, and May 20th. So this balances between not the same letter day of the week, not the same travel group. We try to balance all of those things. We're also looking at how we can build time into the day more regularly for students and staff and teachers to connect. And Mike Piscatelli's got some survey to his faculty out, and it's probably premature to report on that, but I just want you to know that there is a lot of interest in addressing the concerns we've heard from our students and from the concerns we've heard from our faculty and staff too. But we're looking forward to second semester because it's all just gets better and better as we turn the calendars into the spring months. Any questions on any of that?
Marie or Dr. Wiles, I had one quick question.
Sure.
What's the net gain of students that opted for in-person the second semester versus the first semester?
You know, I knew you would ask me that. I should have brought that slide with me. It is, I think, and I don't know if maybe Neil or Regan remember the number, but it's far more are coming back than are leaving. And I want to say close to 150. Does that sound right? I will email that number tomorrow. I actually had it written down and then didn't bring it.
Thank you.
All right, the last topic is last minute kind of thing on Friday afternoon. And this is the update on higher risk sports. Friday afternoon, the governor made an announcement that he was going to allow higher risk sports to be held starting February 1st, which is Monday, if approved by local departments of health. So the local departments of health have not yet ruled on this. It could happen as soon as tomorrow, but I know our own department, Dr. Elizabeth Whalen said we would know before February 1st. In the meantime, this has generated tons of conversation among athletic directors, coaches, superintendents, and others. So the Suburban Council of Athletic Directors have put together, I guess I would call it a model for how this could play out for the sports that are under consideration, which are, and Dave can correct me if I'm wrong, it's basketball, wrestling, ice hockey, and competitive cheer. So we're bringing this to you tonight, and I'll turn this over to Dave for a minute here, because we need a sense of, if the Albany County Department of Health says, yes, you can go ahead with higher risk sports, what will Guilderland do? So Dave, what did I miss?
No, thanks, Dr. Wells. You did a really good job setting the stage here. And hi, everybody, I'm back. I just wanted to kind of just start, obviously we're about to open up a discussion about a tough topic. And I want to, when I was here in December, I kind of reiterated how successful our fall season was. And that was a challenge. And we were able to navigate through that season. And it was a really, really great success. And currently we've got our low and moderate risk sports for the winter season going now, most of which have been going since the middle of December. And that's bowling, swimming, gymnastics, and cross-country ski. And indoor track has actually been going since January 4th. So, another challenging situation, but we are navigating through it, and it's going very, very well. So kudos to the coaches and athletes and parents and everyone involved. So like Dr. Wiles said, we have a potential path for the higher risk sports, basketball, hockey, competitive cheer, and wrestling. I'm here to provide additional information, answer any questions, and try and convince our lovely esteemed board that we can do this. obviously, before we open it up, I just like to add that if we did have the opportunity to do this, we would continue to do what's worked well. And that's mask wearing for our athletes and our coaches, daily screenings, prioritizing physical distancing, keeping our competitions inside our league, and prioritizing sanitation as well. So that's all I wanted to add before we open it up to the floor here for any questions and for discussion. Seema.
Oh, I think Barb was ahead in that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I looked down. I don't know who raised their hand first.
It was Barb,
Barb?
and then.
Okay.
That's okay. I'm delighted that there's at least a consideration, of having these sports. I know Connecticut and Massachusetts have had basketball already and seem to be doing quite well. When you listen to Marie's report about the student exchange and the mental stress and the lack of being with their friends and with their peers, anything that we can do to make these seasons happen, to me, we should do. The only question I have of all the sports that were mentioned, and maybe you can clarify it a little bit more, is the wrestling. That one I see, very, very close contact. All the other sports, it's momentary type of contact. And how would you deal with that?
Sure. I'll tackle the wrestling question, and I think you're absolutely right. I think this is the sport, I would say, that probably many people put in its own separate category in terms of risk. But I'd like to advocate for the wrestlers here. I think, it's of all of the sports that we've listed under high risk, I think it's the sport that has the greatest ability to cohort compared to the other high risk sports. In wrestling, you're talking about, kids separated by weight classes. So from a practice standpoint, this is a sport that we could assign our wrestlers partners or groups, small groups of 3 or 4, and they would be training with those wrestlers for the duration of the season. So it's less people that they'd be coming in contact with. I fully understand the optics of, when you have 2 wrestlers competing against each other, they're extremely close. And I think that's probably the reason why many consider wrestling in its own category. But I wanted to point out that I think that wrestling has the ability to cohort better than the other sports. We would, if we were allowed to go forward with wrestling, we would not do the standard Saturday tournaments where you're talking many schools and many people. We would create a schedule with dual meets only, so competing against only one school. And we've had some ADs that are former wrestlers themselves have put together some really good guidance on what it would look like on match day. Another interesting thing that Dr. Wiles and I had only a brief chance to talk about, and I just wanted to throw it out there for food for thought, because it's being discussed at the league level for wrestling, is the idea of, especially if we have, tests left over, the idea of adding mandatory testing in for wrestling. And what that would look like in a nutshell is if we had a dual meet on a Thursday, we would be organizing testing for our entire wrestling team to be conducted in the afternoon of the day before the wrestling meet, as would our opponents, and anybody that, if anybody does pop up a positive test, then obviously we would contact trace and hopefully if that case came up, if that situation arose, through contact tracing, hopefully it would only wipe out a small group of kids for a short period of time because of the cohorting. So I know that's far from official. I just wanted to throw that out there as discussion because I think, it's an interesting idea. And I do think of all of the sports listed, I do think wrestling is viewed by some in their own category as risk. And I think possibly, issuing a mandatory testing procedure for all schools involved on our schedule, I think is a really interesting idea if we could pull it off.
That really makes me feel a lot better about the wrestling. The only other question I would have, if basketball is approved by Commissioner Whalen, can we loosen up the parent not participation, but viewing? We have these huge gymnasiums where we could just make sure that everybody is spread out 2 feet apart or 6 feet apart, and you wouldn't have to limit it, I think, to, to 2 people. So could that at least be considered in your thought process?
Yeah, I think, well, Barbara, you hit on the two, I think, most discussed topics, on the last couple of days with the athletic directors and wrestling and spectators. And I know the superintendent's talked about spectators as well. And I think we're, again, we're playing a hypothetical here because we're hoping that the county, Albany County Department of Health approves, and we're hoping to get your support and approval as well. And if that happens, I do think priority one is to get a schedule, get this off the ground successfully, get the kids, opportunities. And, when you consider the idea of spectators, I can speak for the conversations that we've had in the league with the athletic directors. The bulk of the athletic directors are in support of a phasing in approach for spectators, in that if we get approval, let's start our seasons, with the focus on the athletes, and only athletes, coaches, and game personnel are attending the first, however many games. And if it's something that, we prove that we can do successfully and the numbers continue to trend down, then, spectators can be revisited. But I will add, on the spectator piece, is if that happened, and, if we went with a phase-in approach, the good news is Andy Mayock and his crew do a fabulous job streaming our sporting events and doing play-by-play. And I know the entire league has talked about the fact that they have the ability to do something similar. So if we went with a phased-in approach and kind of got everything off the ground successfully before we kind of brought in spectators, our parents and students and anyone and fans could view these contests via the stream.
Okay, that would be fine. I would still prefer, if it's possible, to allow people to go to the games. I've attended probably zillions of particularly basketball games over the course of my whole life here. And very rarely is that gym overwhelmingly, stacked. And considering the size of the suburban council gyms, I just think it could very safely be done. But I leave that up to your discretion, and just speak on the part of parents, grandparents, relatives, and friends that I know they'd love to see the kids in person if it's possible. If it isn't, as long as we can give the kids the opportunity to play, at least we have half the pie.
Seema, did you still have a question?
No, my questions were about spectators and wrestling also. So
Okay.
do that. Thank you.
Yep. Blanca?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. When you say cohorts for wrestling, how many in a cohort are you thinking? I know it's not definite, but I'm trying to get an idea. And how, I should know this because I have wrestlers in my family, but how long are the matches, like the tumbling on the floor? Those are my two questions, and then I have another comment.
Sure. So as far as the cohorts, that's, if we got approval, that would be obviously topic number one. That would be a discussion between myself and the wrestling coaching staff. But I would start with 2. I think they would probably point out, the what ifs, and what if a student is absent and, their partner's not there, and that makes things a little bit more difficult. So obviously the smaller the better. But I think that might be a reason why, the coaches might lobby to do a smaller group of cohort. But I certainly think, the majority of the time, if not all of the time, we could probably do it with 2 in a cohort. And as far as your question about the length of wrestling matches, and we've got a former wrestler and a former athletic director in here, so correct me, Regan, if I'm wrong, but it's 3 periods of 5 minutes. Is that correct, Regan?
No, that'd be a little bit too long. That's a marathon.
I was a basketball player.
Yep, three 2-minute periods.
Thank you.
Thank you. So from my perspective, I see, first of all, I just want to be clear. I recognize that the kids need this. I think I would like to do everything we can to make this happen, but they're called high risk sports for a reason. So I think in order to make this happen, there's going to have to be some pretty dramatic things taking place here. I like the idea of the 2-person cohort. The time, I thought the matches were longer. They certainly felt longer when I saw my cousin and mangled on the mat, but you know, the timing, I suppose, isn't so bad. You could sanitize the mats. I'm trying to think through this for you or with you. I don't think I would ever be supportive of any kind of spectators. We don't know yet what the UK strand is going to do. They say it's more infectious. We're like right at the beginning of that. I would encourage you guys to consider that if you do cohorts, it's going to really take a commitment level, which I know our students are capable of, but it's a different level of commitment because it's a high risk sport. So they basically need to cut off any social activities on the weekend. If they're doing anything, they just have to be like extra firm about that. And I don't know if it's something you could address or add. It has to be a different level of commitment, I think, from the players. And I did have one other question. I am concerned about competitive cheer. I sort of put that in the same category, especially because there's also yelling involved, you know, projecting your voice and such. Are we currently allowing college scouts? Because I know, are they even called college scouts anymore? But you know what I mean? The people that are interested, are we allowing that? Because I would hate to take that opportunity away from anyone that's already playing.
Sure, your last question's you know, difficult because it didn't really come up much in the fall, you know, since my time here, and that was when we were outdoors and you know, following the Department of Health guidelines of 2 spectators per player. So I don't think that question even came up. You know, obviously we've got you know, we've got the ability, you know, with our huddle video scouting services. Our coaches have the ability to video and send video to coaches. I think that helps. You know, so something similar would be available for cheer. I know cheer is talking about in their guidance. They're talking about you know, virtual competitions. That's one of the guidance recommendations for cheerleading, and live streaming their competitions. So you've got a group of judges that are judging from the comfort of their own home and watching, you know, these teams compete live. You know, the schedule is calling for that happening on Saturdays if we had approval, of course. But yeah, it would really all depend on, you know, what we end up doing with spectators in the winter. But I think in the meantime, I would certainly encourage, you know, the coaches and athletes to continue to utilize our capabilities to video and get that video out to college scouts. Gloria? I'm sorry, Blanca, did you have any more questions? I didn't mean to skip right over you. Okay, Gloria?
I was wondering what the feeling was among the coaches regarding the idea of having some testing done. I really thought that was an excellent idea.
Yeah, I exchanged a couple texts with our wrestling coach. I just said, hey, just to give you a heads up, this is floating out there as an idea. I didn't want him to be blindsided by it. And his response was, the wrestling community will go all in for that. I mean, they you know, they get weight certifications and other sets of tests as well. So I think they're kind of used to it. You know, I think so. I think, you know, the coaches, you know, I think would hit the ground running with it, and I know the wrestling community would be supportive. I think they're just looking for an opportunity, you know, to compete and to you know, to get back with their teammates, with their coaches, and do what they've done for, you know, since they were young. So it's an interesting idea. Like I said, I want to you know continue to emphasize that that's something that we would have to discuss more. But I know when we discussed it as a league this morning, you know, it was very well received amongst all of the schools that offer wrestling. Luciano?
So if the sports are approved, and I hope they are, how will they affect the sports that are currently going? Like logistically and space-wise, are they going to be able to all practice in the building, or is there going to be some conflicting with space-wise and things like that?
Great question. So I wanted to share the proposed season dates that Section 2 released. So if we get approval for the winter high-risk season, they will go from February 1st to March 13th. And obviously the low and moderate risk sports that are competing now will continue. The end date for those sports are the end of February. I don't envision any issues, gym space issues with the winter high risk sports and the sports that are going on now. Fall 2, which for Guilderland would be football and boys and girls volleyball and game day cheer. That is slated to schedule to start on March 7th and run to May 1st. So there is a week of overlap there that we have some time there if we get approval here to kind of go over some of the logistical hurdles there. But I also want to point out that the idea with this potential schedule is that last week for winter high risk would be the week that we're doing our culminating tournaments or culminating events for those high risk sports. So there's going to be some overlap there with the fall 2 teams. But the amount, the number of days that we have overlap there, it really all depends on how far the teams progress through those culminating events. But again, I want to reiterate that we have time to go through there, but certainly there is some overlap concern there. You're not just talking gym space, you're talking about athletes playing both sports that we'd have to figure that out. Coaches possibly coaching both sports, we'd have to figure that out. But fortunately, that was one thing that they wanted to make sure there wasn't a ton of overlap. And so it's a week. It is something we would have to plan out. But it's only a week, and like I said, that's when the culminating tournaments would happen. And then finally, the spring season would start on May 2nd and run through the end of June 25th. And because baseball is the only sport in spring that requires 10 practices before the first game, we would start baseball on April 28th, so that all spring athletes would be on the same schedule for being able to have their first athletic contest. It's a tight calendar, so we wouldn't want to waste opportunities for competitions. We want to get as many in as we can safely. Rebecca?
Thank you. And thanks for giving us this opportunity to speak about this. I was not in favor of allowing medium risk sports in the fall. I thought, like many of us, thought there were unknowns prior to the start of the school year, and I was concerned about the public health impact. But in the 6 months since, we've had data, just like you presented, that in our school district, there's been little to no transmission of COVID through athletics, which really speaks to the vigilance of our students, the coaches, the parents. And I'm sure I'm not alone in seeing the psychological and academic toll of the disruption of the typical school and sports experience during the school year. We know that sports has both physical and psychological health benefits to kids, and we have more data now than we did in the early fall, and that data so far is very reassuring. So obviously we're all weighing the risks versus the benefits, and that's very difficult. And that needs to be subject to change depending on whether the data changes. But my vote would be to allow high-risk sports to move forward if the county agrees, alongside emphasizing that that risk can be decreased but not eliminated by our athletes, the parents, the coaches continuing to follow safety protocols strictly, including off the field.
Thank you. Seema?
Sorry, I have one more question. I also agree with Rebecca in support of approving them with the caveat that if things change, that this would come up again. And also with the idea of testing, especially for wrestling. I'm just wondering if you get a sense from the other athletic directors that are in the same sections, are they leaning towards, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to talk to them at all about this. I'm just wondering what the other schools are doing.
Well, in regards to going forward or not going forward with winter high risk sports, again, I've been a part of the conversations with the athletic directors, and Dr. Wiles has had a chance to exchange messages with superintendents, and I believe they may be meeting again tomorrow to discuss. From the athletic director standpoint, and I'm assuming when they talk to me that they are on the same page as their superintendent. But I also want to point out that sometimes that might not always be the case. The general feeling that I get, and it's a strong feeling that I get, is that, if the local counties, departments of health give approval, I think not only are you going to see the majority of the schools in our conference, if not all, go forward with these sports. I think you're going to see the majority, and again, high number of schools in Section 2 that go forward. And again, that's assuming they get approval from their county department of health and from their school districts. But that's the sense that I get. And I know that, the superintendents especially wanted to talk a little bit more about wrestling and spectators. But, I feel like the majority of schools would go forward, especially in our league. I know in our league, just based on the conversations that I've had last couple of days.
Seema, I'll just weigh in. My colleagues met yesterday, and I wasn't able to join in, but I did call a few of them this morning to get a sense of how to go. And I will just say that I think Dave summarized the views of the superintendents pretty well too. The issues that we are worried about is, the suburban council spans 4 counties. So we would be hopeful to have a consensus across the counties. That was really important. And then really every other big issue that we've talked about tonight came up: spectators and no spectators, wrestling, testing. But the overarching feeling, honestly, which I share, is I think our athletic programs did a great job so far this year. And I think our kids need as many opportunities as we can safely provide. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, Blanca, do you have another question? Yep.
Just a comment, just so that you leave with the finality here. I would also vote in favor of it. I agree with everything Rebecca said. I was actually opposed to some of the moderate risk winter sports, but the proof is in the pudding. You guys have done an amazing job, and I really trust your staff with this. So I would definitely vote in favor as well.
Thank you.
Would anyone object? Maybe that's the way to ask the question, because here is the reality of the timeline here. If there is a yes, the league needs to schedule the games, which normally takes weeks, and now it needs to be done in hours. We would need to bring before the board the appointment of the coaches at our February 9th meeting, which would be after the start of the season, which isn't unheard of, but I don't like to get the cart in front of the horse any more than necessary. But of course, this was late breaking news. So if anyone really has strong objections, it would be good to know, so we know kind of what next steps we need to take to be part of this effort, if allowed.
I haven't said anything. I don't have any huge objections. I agree with Rebecca and Blanca that we've done a great job this season, and barring any significant changes. And testing will be great, but I know there's restrictions on that, or on funding. But I'm not an objection. Just to let you know. Thanks.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dave, for joining us tonight. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, you know where to find us.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dave.
Yep.
Are you all set, Dr. Wiles, with your items?
I am. Thank you so much for a generous allotment of time.
You're welcome. Okay, so moving on to action items. We just have board president action. There are a list of policies. Oh, I'm sorry. We're still in information. two board president items. Okay, so the first one is the policy review up for information on public participation in board meetings. I think this really addressed public comment, right, with the online meetings. If anybody in policy wants to talk about any of your conversation, that'd be great, or want to point anything out to us?
We just thought that we should update the policy to accommodate, for what we've been doing practically, with the virtual meetings. And we tried to capture, how people can still participate. So it's parts in yellow are just the additions of, how citizens can still participate, even in COVID times.
So Barb, if someone wanted to get into that second public comment, they could email Linda during the meeting, and then we would check then, kind of like a regular board meeting, we do that.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have action items. And so board president action, we have a set of policies A through R, huge set of policies. Can I have a motion to discuss the items A through R?
So moved.
Second, Ben. Any questions or comments about the policies? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Ben, did you vote? Oh, sorry, delayed on mine. Did you vote? Thanks.
Yes.
Okay. Passes 9-0. And we'll move on to board committee reports. We'll start with communications.
Yes, we have not met since the last board meeting. We will be meeting February 3rd at 2:30.
Thanks, Gloria. What about business practices? I forgot who reads that one.
We met, I think it was before the last meeting, but it was just to discuss what Neil and Danielle went over with us. And we do not have another meeting scheduled.
And audit, Ben?
We have not met and we have no meeting scheduled.
Thank you. And policy, Barb?
We've worked on a number of policies, one of which we will have to look at tonight, the public participation at board meetings. And we're meeting again February 10th at 8 a.m.
Okay. And lastly, the Equity and Diversity Committee. Kelly, do you want to give an update? Gloria, can you mute your mic? Sorry, there's a lot of, thank you.
Sure. Hi. We had our Equity Diversity Committee meeting on January 20th with, I think everybody was present, if maybe not one person. It was a great meeting, and we went through kind of how it's going to be structured. We're going to have a learning component for the first bit of it. This one, we had an article, a New York Times article about bias training. There was some discussion about that article, which is good. We had set up a Google Drive for resources for the committee to use. We discussed the 4 subcommittees, and we each voted to our preferences for which committee we wanted to be on. They were engagement, communications, research, and internal equity audit. We had 3 public comments which were read. And then we had discussions about kind of how to move forward with it, with the committee, and what we were going to focus on, what we weren't going to focus on. We never really didn't come to a great consensus just yet, but there's going to be more discussion on focusing on other marginalized groups or focusing strictly on color or race. So there's more to come from that. And kind of looking at this, I kind of, on a side note, I was thinking, I don't know if there was a way to kind of maybe connect this committee with the policy committee somehow, because, we just, approved 15 policies in one big fall swoop, but we never really got the lens through the lens of maybe diversity or equity folks or people that might look at it that way. Kind of one of the examples I thought of while I was thinking about this was I was on policy last year, I think, and the policy had he for the superintendent, and I'm like, can we change this to something, he, she, or they, I think we maybe landed on, or, and that may not have come up if there wasn't a woman on the committee, even though we had a female superintendent sitting right in front of us. So those are the kind of things that I think would be great to be useful, or this committee might be also useful for, to have a once over through that view for these policies that we may not really think about, or we kind of just take for granted and go through. So that's my 2 cents for engaging the equity committee with the policy committee to kind of look at that. Other than that, I don't think we have another meeting set up just yet. I think we'll probably send out something soon for that. That's what I have for an update. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think you brought up a good point there. Maybe that internal equity audit would be looking at something like the policies and pronouns that are written in there, and looking at other things that are in the school that would fall under that. So it's a great point. And public comment number 2. Do we have any other public comment? Public comments? No. Barb, you have a question?
Not a question, just a comment on the last meeting.
Sure.
For me, the part that I really probably enjoyed the most was the discussion from the group of the article, that learning component. And that's probably the part that I'm most looking forward to, the next time we meet, because it's just great to have, 20 different viewpoints. And fortunately, all the people on the committee are very willing to share. So it was wonderful. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Barb. Does anybody else have any comments or ideas that they want to share? Feedback? Blanca, do you have your hand raised?
Are we on to the ideas and sharing? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Marie, wave at me if you want me to hold this idea, okay? But I had brought it up at our policy meeting, and so I just wanted to bring it up here in this forum. But if you want me not to, pretend to faint or wave. I brought up this idea, and then Luciano had an even better idea, as far as I'm concerned, that this year may not necessarily reflect our students' ability academically, and yet we're still grading them. They're still grades. And so for your consumption and your consideration, what about a pass-fail option? The option piece was Luciano, who brought up his experience at college. But I feel like there's so much riding on these grades. The kids need to get into college. They need to pick their courses based on how successful they are. And honestly, are we really grading their ability in some cases, or what they've learned, or are we grading their circumstances and the environmental influences? I would just hate to pigeonhole somebody with a grade that then they can't get rid of, because of the pandemic. So I just want to put that out there. Luciano, feel free to chime in if you want to add anything.
No, I think you explained it perfectly. A lot of people have called for an option, maybe not a pass-fail, but an alternative grading system, and making it optional for some students who wish to participate in that would make it fair to other students that don't want to participate. So I think it's something definitely to consider.
Any other? Oh, Ben, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I mean, just adding on to that, as far as grading this year goes, I think that given how we're doing school, right, we're with asynchronous learning and, class on one day, not on the next day, and going remote when we don't have staff, and, that it's important that there's a way for teachers to, be communicating with their kids and keeping track of their work. And while you all know I'm not a fan of grades, I recognize that the system that's in place. And so, I don't know that maybe that's the best option right now. We had trouble with kind of the grading system that we used last spring. But one thing that I would like to, kind of throw out there is GPA, which is, already a statistical artifice, kind of under the idea that you can add all these homogeneous classes and then, kind of get a result. But of course, the result doesn't tell you if you're, good at social studies or good at math. And it certainly doesn't reflect the fact that, you might have had a different English teacher grading your essay than somebody else. Certainly classes during a pandemic where there's asynchronous learning and you could be in one day and not the other day and go remote, and some kids are remote entirely. Those are not homogeneous units that you maybe should count in a average. So this year maybe a done deal, but my thought is for the future, kind of calculating all these GPAs and kind of wondering, what do we even throw, what kind of data are we actually putting into this calculation?
I think it's a great idea. My college students are a pass fail. They were this pass fail this past fall, and they are this spring. I think it would be important to get the insight and really guidance from the teachers and probably administrators and Damien to hear, what they have to say, since they're the ones working with the students, and probably, I'm assuming, guidance counselors also, because I don't know how that works in terms of what is required and what's not, but I think it's a great idea. Gloria left and Gloria came back. Any other questions or comments?
I just want to jump in here to say I haven't had an in-depth conversation with our principals and so on, but I was talking with Mr. Piscatelli about this, and he pointed out to me that, last year we went to the DEL, NEL, and at the end of the year, we gave students the option to go back to a numerical grade if they didn't want the DEL, NEL. And we are continuing to get requests from students to go back to the numerical grade. Dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of them. So for what it's worth, he just told me that the day after our policy meeting.
It's interesting. Hey, anybody else? Oh, Barb, did you have your hand raised? Go ahead.
Yes. What I think we're finding is that some students actually are quite successful at what we're doing right now. And I think those kids, I like Luciano's option that, they would be able to continue to have their grades. But we know for a fact that kids that never struggled in math, today, many of them are struggling tremendously. And so I think by having the option, as Marie just described, if we go in that direction, it should at least be an option. Because as I said, some of the kids are actually flourishing. I'm amazed, but they are. And others, as I said, who never struggled are having an awful hard time. So if we do it, I would prefer Luciano's method that, you have the option.
Thanks, Barb. Sorry, I having a connection problem. Does anybody else have their hand raised? I can't see. Any other comments? Okay, so can I get a motion to adjourn? Ben, second. Barb, all in favor? Aye. Passes 9-0. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night. Thanks.